Picture this. A young athlete, maybe they're out on the soccer field, they're giving it their all, they go for a header, maybe a little collision, they shake it off, they keep playing. It's a common sight, right? But what if I told you that hit, even if it's not a diagnosed concussion, could have lasting consequences down the road?
Yeah, it's true. And it's something we're learning more and more about. It's called Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy, or CTE for short.
CTE. We're going to deep dive into that today.
Specifically, its impact on young athletes.
Yeah, that's really important because there's so much at stake for these young athletes.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone involved in contact sports, really, parents, coaches, we need to understand what's going on.
So let's break it down. CTE. What exactly is it? What's going on inside the brain?
Imagine the brain. It's this really delicate structure, kind of gelatinous almost. It's housed inside this, very rigid skull.
Right.
So every time there's an impact to the head, even if it doesn't cause a full-blown concussion, the brain can still move around in there.
Okay.
These repeated jolts, they set off a chain reaction, basically, at the molecular level.
So it's not just the immediate impact, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. One of the key players here, well, it's a protein called tau.
Tau, okay.
In a healthy brain, tau proteins kind of act like scaffolding. They help to stabilize nerve cells. They help the communication between those cells.
Right. I see. So they're pretty important.
Oh, they're essential.
Okay.
But with CTE, these tau proteins start to get all tangled up. They lose their structure.
So instead of providing support, they're getting in the way.
Yeah. It's like the scaffolding collapses. It disrupts the way the brain is wired.
That sounds serious. What kind of effects does this have on, on a young person especially?
Well, the symptoms can be really varied. And they often don't show up for years, even decades after the trauma happened.
Wow.
You might see mood swings, maybe increased irritability, or even aggression.
Really?
Then you've got the cognitive challenges. Difficulty concentrating, memory problems, problems with judgment.
And these are all because of those tau proteins getting tangled up.
Exactly. And in some cases, in the most severe cases, CTE can lead to dementia-like symptoms.
So we're talking about really severe long-term consequences.
Yeah, it can really impact a person's quality of life.
And this is why it's so concerning, right? Because we're talking about young, still developing brains.
Precisely. We often hear about these high-profile cases in professional athletes.
Like Aaron Hernandez.
Yeah, Aaron Hernandez. It's a tragic example of just how devastating CTE can be. But, and this is important, it's not just a problem for the pros.
Right. His case really brought it into the public eye, but it made people start to think, what about all those hits that happened earlier on, in high school, even younger?
Absolutely. CTE doesn't discriminate. It's not confined to a certain level of play.
So it's not just the NFL.
Not at all. I mean, there was a study done by Boston University, and they found early signs of CTE in athletes who'd started playing contact sports before they were even 12 years old.
12!
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a real wake-up call.
Especially for parents who are thinking about signing their kids up for football or hockey or...
It raises a lot of questions. And those researchers, they were incredibly thorough. They analyzed brain tissue, from athletes who had passed away. And they were able to link the presence of those tau tangles, those messed up proteins, with a history of playing contact sports.
And they were finding them in kids who had started playing before 12.
Exactly. It shows just how vulnerable young brains are.
You'd think that young brains would be more resilient because they're still developing, but it's actually the opposite.
It's a bit counterintuitive, I know. A child's brain, it's going through this rapid development. It's making all these connections that shape their cognitive abilities, their emotions.
And those repeated impacts are disrupting that whole process.
Exactly. It's like throwing a wrench in the machinery.
Wow. So we can't just assume that kids will bounce back.
No, not when it comes to their brains. And it's not just about concussions either. Even those seemingly minor hits, the ones that don't get reported, those can add up over time.
So every tackle, every check into the boards, they all have the potential to leave a mark.
Unfortunately, yes.
So even if an athlete doesn't have a concussion, these smaller hits could still be contributing to CTE later on.
That's right. I'm not saying contact sports are all bad. It's just about understanding the risks and taking steps to minimize them.
Right. Knowing all this about how serious CTE is, what can we actually do to protect young athletes?
Well, a lot of it starts with awareness. Coaches, parents, young athletes themselves, Everyone needs to be educated about CTE.
Yeah.
The warning signs, the importance of reporting any suspected head injury, no matter how small it seems.
So we need a real culture shift in youth sports. Get away from that tough it out mentality.
Absolutely.
Make it okay to say, hey, I got hit. I need to sit this one out.
Exactly. We need to prioritize brain health.
Put safety ahead of, winning at all costs.
Right. Winning is important, but not at the expense of a child's long-term health.
It's about teaching kids to play smart, to use proper technique, and to speak up when something's wrong.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of responsibility.
And hopefully that culture of responsibility will help to protect these young athletes and keep them safe.
That's the goal.
And the more we learn about CTE,
The better equipped we'll be to achieve that goal.
well, this has been really eye-opening. But we're not done yet. We're going to continue this deep dive into CTE. We'll look at the latest research, the prevention strategies, and we'll explore the future of CTE treatment.
It's a complex issue, but I think there's a lot of hope.
So stick around.
It's great to see, organizations like the Concussion Legacy Foundation really taking this seriously.
Yeah, they're doing some amazing work. What are some of the things that stand out to you?
Well, their hashtag Team Up Speak Up campaign, it's fantastic. It encourages athletes to report concussions, to seek medical attention, without feeling like they're letting their team down.
Right, because there's often that pressure to play through pain.
Yeah, that toughness mentality, it's deeply ingrained.
So this campaign is trying to change that.
Exactly. They're saying, look, it's not weak to report a concussion. It's actually a sign of responsibility.
Yeah.
You're protecting yourself. You're setting a good example for your teammates.
So let's say an athlete does have a concussion. What are the next steps? How do they get back to playing safely?
Well, there's a specific protocol. It's called a graduated return to play protocol.
Oh.
It's always supervised by a healthcare professional.
Yeah.
And it's not about rushing back. It's about gradually increasing activity as the brain heals.
What does that look like?
Well, it starts with complete rest, both cognitive and physical.
Oh.
That gives the brain time to recover from the initial trauma.
Got it. So no screens, no physical activity, just rest.
Right. Then, as symptoms subside, you can slowly introduce some light aerobic exercise.
Okay.
Then you move on to sport-specific activities, but without any contact. And finally, you gradually reintroduce full contact practice and eventually competition.
But each step of the way, they're being monitored by a doctor.
Exactly. Making sure there are no recurring symptoms.
And if there are.
You step back to the previous stage. No exceptions.
So it's a really cautious approach.
It has to be. We're talking about a young person's future. Even with all these protocols, there's no way to completely eliminate the risk of CTE. We have to be honest about that.
Right.
So it's about weighing the benefits of playing these sports against the risks.
Having those open and honest conversations.
Exactly. Parents, coaches, athletes, they need to make informed decisions.
Speaking of choices, a lot of people focus on traditional contact sports. But what about some alternatives? Sports that might offer similar benefits, but with less risk of head injury.
There are some great options out there. Take flag football, for instance.
Right.
You get the teamwork, the strategy, the physical activity, but without that same level of impact.
What about soccer? Any way to enjoy that without all the headers?
Oh, absolutely. There's a big movement now to limit or even eliminate headers in youth soccer.
Especially for younger age groups.
Yeah. It lets kids develop those other skills, footwork, passing, strategy, without risking their brains.
So it's really encouraging to see these alternatives becoming more popular.
It is. We've talked a lot about prevention. But what about treatment? What happens if someone's already been diagnosed with CTE?
That's a good question.
Well, unfortunately, there's no cure right now. But there are things that can help manage symptoms, improve quality of life.
Like what?
It's often a multidisciplinary approach. Medication, therapy, lifestyle changes, support groups. It takes a whole team.
Can you give us some specific examples of the types of therapies?
Sure. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right.
It can be really helpful for those mood disorders, anxiety, impulsivity, things that are often associated with CTE.
So it teaches people how to cope with those challenges.
Exactly. It gives them tools and strategies. Then there's occupational therapy.
Yep.
That helps people regain lost function, adapt to everyday life. And speech therapy can help with communication difficulties.
So it's about addressing all the different ways that CTE can affect a person's life.
Exactly. Their emotions, their social interactions, their overall quality of life. And a comprehensive approach is really what's needed.
And hopefully, as research continues, we'll have even more effective treatments.
That's the goal. We've covered a lot of ground today. The science, the impact on young athletes, the prevention strategies, the treatment options.
Yeah, it's been a lot to take in, but there's still so much we don't know about CTE.
There are a lot of unanswered questions.
And that's what we'll explore in the final part of this deep dive. We'll talk about the latest research, the mysteries that scientists are still trying to solve. It feels like we're just scratching the surface here with CTE.
We are. It's a relatively new area of research.
What are some of the big questions that scientists are still trying to figure out?
Well, one of the most puzzling things is why some athletes who've had a lot of head trauma, they develop CTE and others don't.
So it's not just about how many hits you take.
Right. I mean, you could have two players, same sport, same position, played for the same amount of time. One ends up with CTE, the other's fine.
So there must be other factors involved.
Exactly. Could be genetics.
Yeah.
Maybe some people are just more susceptible to this kind of damage.
Makes sense.
Or maybe it's lifestyle factors, diet. Who knows?
Environment.
Yeah, could be. These are all things researchers are looking into.
It makes me wonder, in the future, maybe we could have some kind of genetic test.
Oh, like to see if someone's predisposed to CTE?
Yeah, exactly. Like we do for other conditions.
That would be amazing. It would allow us to tailor prevention strategies, focus on the athletes who are most at risk.
It'd be a game changer.
It would. Another question is, is there a tipping point?
A tipping point? What do you mean?
Like, is there a certain number of hits, a certain threshold beyond which the risk of CTE just skyrockets?
Ah, I see.
Or is it more about the cumulative effect? The total force over time?
That's a tough one to figure out.
It is. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem.
We talked earlier about how hard it is to diagnose CTE in living people.
Right. Right now, you can only really confirm it after someone's passed away, which obviously makes research and treatment much more difficult.
So we're kind of in the dark, in a way.
In a way, yeah. But there's some promising research happening.
Oh, that's good to hear. What kind of research?
Scientists are working on developing biomarkers.
Biomarkers?
Yeah. Specific molecules that are released into the bloodstream or the cerebrospinal fluid because of the CTE damage.
So if you can measure these biomarkers, you could potentially identify people who are at risk or who are already showing early signs of CTE.
That's the idea.
So you could intervene early on before the symptoms get really bad.
Exactly. Early detection would be huge.
It would revolutionize how we approach CTE.
It would. Of course, this research is still in its early stages.
Right.
We need more studies, make sure these biomarkers are reliable. But it's definitely a promising avenue.
Speaking of promising avenues, what about treatment? Anything new on the horizon?
There are some interesting things being explored. Some researchers are looking at medications that could target the underlying causes of CTE.
Like reduce the buildup of tau protein.
Exactly. Or reduce inflammation in the brain.
So instead of just treating the symptoms, they're trying to actually stop the disease itself.
That's right. And there's also a lot of interest in stem cell therapy.
Stem cells?
Yeah. The idea is to use them to repair the damaged brain tissue.
It's cutting-edge stuff.
It is. But it has a lot of potential.
It sounds like there's a lot to be hopeful about.
I think so. The research is moving forward. And with more funding, more collaboration, who knows what we'll be able to achieve.
So, big picture, what are the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember, especially if they're involved in contact sports?
The main thing is stay informed. Learn about CTE. Understand the risks. Know the warning signs. And take steps to protect yourself or your kids if you're a parent.
And don't be afraid to speak up. Advocate for change, whether it's at your kid's school or at the league level.
Exactly. We need to push for safer playing conditions, stricter concussion protocols, and continued research, of course.
It's been a really fascinating deep dive, eye-opening too.
It is a complex issue.
But there's hope. We're learning more all the time, and we can all do our part to protect athletes.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play.
Thanks for joining us. And if you want more information about CTE, you can check out the Concussion Legacy Foundation or the Brain Injury Association of America. They're both great resources. And remember, this is a conversation that needs to continue. The more we talk about CTE, the better equipped we'll be to protect athletes of all ages,